The Verith cubs were 3 months old, roughly the size of a large dog, and utterly harmless. Anna knew this. She had read the xenobiology reports twice. She had watched the footage of adult Veriths, six-limbed, armor-plated apex predators that ruled the food chain on Kelser 9, and had confirmed with her own eyes that the cubs were nothing but oversized, clumsy balls of fluff with too many legs and an appetite for anything that didn't run fast enough. So she couldn't understand why the entire outpost staff acted like the cubs were loaded weapons. "Just keep the enclosure sealed," said Mike, not looking up from his tablet. He was the outpost's senior xenologist, and in the 6 months Anna had worked under him, she'd never seen him this tense. "And don't let them near the perimeter fence. They're babies, Mike. They sneeze and fall over. That's not the point. The point, as Anna would soon learn, was not the cubs themselves." The Kelser 9 research station sat on the edge of the Vane Steppe, a rolling grassland that stretched for 1,000 kilometers in every direction, grassland that belonged, unambiguously, to the Veriths. Every other spacefaring species in the sector gave the planet a wide berth. The Zelkai traders wouldn't land without an armed escort. The Asu Concord had entire diplomatic protocols dedicated to not provoking a Verith pride. Even the Krithan Dominion, whose warships could glass a continent, kept their exploratory teams confined to orbit when Verith territory was involved. Anna had asked why, once, during orientation. The answer she'd gotten was a shrug and a nervous laugh. You don't provoke an apex predator that hunts in prides of 200 and considers the concept of retreat to be a design flaw. She'd laughed too at the time. She stopped laughing 3 weeks later, when the 2 Verith cubs, abandoned after their mother was killed by a rival pride in a territorial dispute just outside station perimeter, wandered into the research outpost, starving, dehydrated, and no more dangerous than a couple of overgrown puppies. Protocol said euthanize or expel. Nobody on staff could bring themselves to do either. So they'd fed them, quietly, off the books. That had been 2 months ago. Word, apparently, traveled. "They're here," said Deverick, the station's Asu liaison, bursting into the command room with all 4 of his eyes wide and his crest fully extended in alarm. "The pride is here." Anna felt her stomach drop. The pride? As in the cubs' pride. As in the adults. As in 40-plus apex predators currently standing at the edge of our sensor range. Not moving, not attacking, just, Deverick made a strangled noise. Just staring. Mike was already moving, pulling up the external feed. Anna followed him to the viewport. What she saw made every hair on her arm stand up. The grassland outside the station's perimeter fence was full of Veriths. Not a handful, dozens. Massive, 6-limbed shapes with plated hides the color of dried blood, each one easily 3 meters at the shoulder, standing in near-perfect silence. They weren't charging. They weren't roaring. They were simply there, arranged in a loose crescent facing the station, utterly motionless, like a jury waiting for a verdict. "They know," Deverick whispered. "They know we have the cubs. They're here to take them back." Or he swallowed. "Or to make an example of us for keeping them. Can we just give the cubs back?" Anna asked. "Open the gate. Let them walk out. Everybody goes home." "That's the plan," Mike said grimly. "Slowly. Carefully. No sudden movements. Comms are drafting the ritual surrender protocol now. The Asu have handled Verith disputes before. They know the forms. We do this exactly right, or none of us leave this station." Anna looked back out at the pride. Something about the stillness bothered her more than a charge would have. A charge, at least, was a shape of aggression she understood. This was something else. This was patience. And patience, on an apex predator that size, felt like a held breath before violence. The cubs, oblivious to the crisis they'd caused, were in the enclosure playing with a length of rope, tumbling over each other with high, chirping barks. It was Mike who was supposed to lead them out. It was Mike who froze at the gate, tablet in hand, sweat on his brow, watching 40 apex predators watch him back. And it was a 26-year-old maintenance technician named Anna, who had no training in xenodiplomacy, no experience with alien predators, and absolutely no business being anywhere near this situation, who walked past him, opened the enclosure gate, and crouched down to scoop up both squirming cubs into her arms like a woman picking up a couple of overexcited retrievers. "Anna," Mike's voice cracked. "Anna, wait." We need the protocol team. We need. They're hungry and scared, and their mom is dead, Anna said, hoisting a cub onto each hip. They immediately started gnawing on her jacket sleeves. I'm just taking them home. That's not a diplomatic incident. That's returning lost property. She walked toward the perimeter gate. Behind her, she heard Deverick make a sound like he was having a stroke. She heard Mike say her name 3 more times, each one higher pitched than the last. She ignored both of them, because the cubs were heavy and squirmy, and one of them had just discovered her hair was an acceptable chew toy. The outer gate rolled open. 40 Veriths went very, very still. Anna walked out onto the open grass alone, unarmed, carrying 2 cubs, toward a pride of the most feared predators in known space. Because in her mind this was simply the correct and obvious thing to do with 2 lost baby animals. It did not occur to her to be afraid. Fear, for Anna, required imagining what could go wrong, and she was too busy trying to keep one cub from climbing onto her shoulders. The lead Verith, larger than the others, scarred across one flank, unmistakably the alpha, took a single step forward. The ground shuddered. Anna kept walking. She stopped roughly 10 meters out, knelt down, and set both cubs on the grass. They immediately bolted, chirping and stumbling, toward the alpha, who lowered her massive armored head and began nosing them over, checking them, sniffing every inch of fur as if counting all their pieces. Anna stood up, brushed the grass off her knees, and said, conversationally, to 40 apex predators who could not understand a word of standard, "There you go. Little troublemakers. They ate a lot, by the way. Hope that's not a problem for you guys." Then she turned around and walked back toward the gate. She did not run. It genuinely did not occur to her to run. And that, Mike would later realize, watching through the viewport with his heart somewhere in his throat, was the single most important detail of the entire encounter. Because Verith's evolution had shaped over 10 million years to read a very specific signal in prey and rival alike: the flinch, the retreat, the hurried, fearful movement of something that knew it was smaller and weaker and expected violence. Anna had given them none of it. She had walked into their midst carrying their young, unafraid, unhurried, and utterly unbothered by the fact that she was surrounded by creatures that could tear her apart in a heartbeat. And then she had simply walked away, like the entire pride was a mildly interesting collection of large dogs. The alpha watched her go. Then, in a gesture that would be studied, debated, and cited in 17 separate xenopsychology papers over the next decade, she lowered her head toward Anna's retreating back. It wasn't a threat display. Deverick, watching from the command room with all 4 eyes wide, would later swear on his own crest feathers that it was the Verith equivalent of a bow. "You," Mike said, when Anna walked back through the gate, "are either the bravest person I have ever met, or you have absolutely no concept of self-preservation." "They were just worried about their kids," Anna said, pulling cub fur out of her hair. "You'd have done the same thing." I froze at the gate. "Well," Anna shrugged, "somebody had to not freeze." Outside, the pride was already retreating into the tall grass, cubs safely tucked between adult bodies, leaving without a sound. Deverick would spend the next 3 days drafting an incident report he wasn't sure anyone in the Asu Concord would believe. Mike would spend the next 3 days trying to figure out how to explain to Fleet Command that their xenopsychological models of Verith threat response had just been rewritten by an off-duty maintenance tech who thought predator diplomacy was the same as returning a neighbor's lost cat. And somewhere out on the Vane steppe, an entire pride of apex predators would remember, for generations, the strange soft-skinned creature who had walked unafraid into the heart of their territory and had simply, calmly, expected everything to be fine. Because it had been.